Here's some interesting notes about Baylor and TCU. Baylor and TCU. Now, TCU's won 6 of the last 7, so they lead the all-time series, 57, 53, and 7. The first time they ever met was in 1899. They scored no points. That's kind of what it was back then. But listen to this. Now, look at these numbers, and you tell me why this makes sense. In Waco, Baylor is 34, 33, and 5. In Fort Worth, TCU is 24, 19, and 2. And you go, wait a minute, how come they played 72 games in Waco? Then look at the asterisks. From 1899 to 1910, every game was played in Waco because TCU, of course, as a lot of people know, originally was located in Waco, Texas.
Yes, it was.
And that's why you see the difference in the number of games that have been played in Waco. It's like, wait a minute, did they decide to play in Waco like teams play in Arlington or whatever? But that's kind of how that 11 games or so that kind of throws it a little bit more of a difference in the games being played in Waco. Now, another part of it. Here's some more. TCU, as I mentioned, has won 6 of 7. Craig, you've alluded to this so many times because it's true. They have owned Baylor since the amazing 2014 Shootout and Classic. In fact, the last game was 33-23. TCU won in Waco. Baylor's win during this stretch was the 3-overtime thriller in Fort Worth at Amon Carter, 29-23. Charlie Brewer and company winning that game. The last Baylor win in Waco was, sure enough, 61-58. The games that these two teams have played, 44 times, the game has been decided by 7 points or less, including 7 ties. And then you see the longest streaks. TCU's won 8 straight at 1 point. Baylor won 8 straight under Grant Taft.
Yeah, they've been dominant in this series the last few years. There's no doubt about that. I don't know why exactly that is, but it hasn't even been, a case where it's TCU's clearly better. Last year they were not better than Baylor. They weren't. They fired their coach mid-season, had Jerry Kill on the sidelines, and they still beat Dave Aranda and Baylor, who went on to win the Big 12 and Sugar Bowl. And if not for that TCU loss, then maybe they're talking playoff. So, that's just – I think that, to me, tells the entire tale of what this series is like. It's like it's no matter how good or bad Baylor is. If Baylor's really bad, it doesn't really matter how good or bad TCU is. They're going to blow out a bad Baylor team, probably. And then the good Baylor teams, they're going to beat them too, even if they're not as good. They're going to ruin their dreams. And so if this was the shoe reversed and Baylor was unbeaten 10-0 and they were heading into Fort Worth, I would, without hesitation in my mind, I'd pick TCU and I wouldn't even lose a wink. I'd probably put my next year of paychecks on it and sleep fine knowing that TCU would handle their business. Shoe on the other foot, I don't know. I don't have a lot of faith in the Bears, and it's not even because of, this year necessarily and what we saw last weekend. I think they'll rebound nicely from last weekend. At least I would hope so. If they don't, then that's a gut check that they will have failed because this is a gut check this week in a major way. But in general, I don't have faith in them to beat TCU because they don't. I mean, if Dave Aranda loses this weekend, do y'all realize he'd be 0-3 versus TCU? Yep. Right? You realize that, right? Do you realize it'd be to 3 different head coaches?
Yeah.
Be to Gary Patterson, Jerry Kill, and Sonny Dykes. Like, does that happen on the other end? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And, I don't know why that is. This is obviously a few years ago. This was tied. This series was tied. And then I think maybe 61-58 gave Baylor like a 1-game lead or something. But then, you look up now and, I think the younger people out there, however many younger people we got watching, like you don't realize it right now, but time goes by really quickly. Especially, as you start getting closer to the midway point. And so you look up and there's people who are in their probably late 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on, that they think of 2014 and 61-58 like it just happened. No, we're closer to the 10-year anniversary than we are to when that game happened. Like that's reality. And so they have taken care of business. That's why they've got a significant lead now. And that's why, there's hopes that they're going to keep doing that and they'll be able to walk out of this game and only have a couple remaining to, prevent them from possibly getting into the playoff. But it'll take a great effort from Baylor. And that's what I hope we see more than anything. It's not even so much about the TCU, series as it is, or even the opponent, as it is about just Baylor's got to play well. I think, and get that bad taste out of their mouth from last week. And it's senior day. And I'm not saying that like that's a distraction. It's reality. And, this group's contributed a lot. And I think there's a lot of senior days going on right now. And I hope people realize that it is human being stuff after all. And there's some people who have made big impacts on this program that are going to be playing their final game. And I think that that's an important thing to take note of as well. So hopefully they're geared up for Saturday.
Speaking of which, go ahead.
Yeah. And look, I think, we were talking after David Hellman was on yesterday about how spite and pettiness is like the only acceptable form of etiquette in sports. Like you can have it, in sports, and it's fine because the other people, it's exchanged in kind. And if team, not the fans should come out again for spite to ruin TCU season. But if the players can't get motivated on the fact that one, you can right whatever happened last week, and two, you can ruin your arch rival's dreams if you beat them. You can ruin their dreams if you beat them. If you can't get up for that, I don't know if you're mature enough to get up for anything.
Yeah, and you shouldn't even have to get that on your plate to get up for them because they obviously have had, as what you said, they've won 6 of the last 7. The one win was triple overtime. There was a loss in double overtime at Amon Carter in the pouring down rain as well. But other than that, other than those 2 games, 62-22, 45-22, TCU in the middle of all that. Now, that was the 16 blackout night and the CAB and all that just went straight to hell and then lost the next year 45-22 in Fort Worth. But all the other games, 30-28, 33-23, 29-23, 16-9. That was that Jalen Rager who had the, or was that Turpin? Was that Rager?
Rager.
Who had the big game, a punt and return, and also a reverse for a touchdown. So that's just a couple of nuggets. Now, you mentioned what you said and what Craig said. Here's Dave Aranda yesterday at the end of our interview. This is the quote. Craig put this up in what is called the Dave Aranda call sheet. This is the very last thing he said to me. The response is going to be the biggest thing, like how we respond. He's talking about his football team, especially after the dud of this last one, is really going to be kind of what is the heart and soul of the team. That's the football coach. And don't you know that's probably being hammered over and over and over again. You shouldn't have to, but maybe you do. And that's the quote. We'll see what the answer is. If you go out and lose to an unbeaten 10-0 team ranked 4th in the country, and it's 27-24, it's a damn dogfight, down to the wire, scratch and claw like a lot of the games have been, that's one thing. But if there's another throw up all over yourself, 31-3 or 27-6 type loss, then we get an answer to Dave Aranda's question. And that doesn't mean TCU is just a better football team, too.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've been thinking about this a lot lately when people message me and all that about what the difference is between last year and this year. And I think part of it is that they lost some guys that were just emotionally mature on a level that is hard to get to. And if you were, kind of a second-tier leader on the team, you might be like, I don't know if I can get to that place. Jalen Petrie, Terrell Bernard, JT Woods, Xavier Newman-Johnson, who had to confront the fact that he had a terrible season in 2020 to come back and have a great one in 2021. Guys like that are all gone, all in the NFL and talent. Yeah, Abrams. So these guys who had just a lot of emotional awareness and maturity to a team that maybe didn't have that in the same level. And we've seen it where the moments they seem to kind of pass them by, and then they realize oh, that was the moment. And we've heard that from Miranda all year long about they've not really grabbed or gravitated to that. And it's a hard thing to replace. Sometimes, you can say, well, okay, they lost Abram Smith, but they've got, and Treston Ebner, but they've got other running backs that they like. They only lost one offensive lineman. But if he was the guy who had the biggest heart, that's not just replacing skill. That's replacing the guy you didn't want to disappoint next to you, especially coming off the season that he had, showing that, look, nothing is over. I thought Xavier Newman-Johnson would leave after 2020 because, what was coming back going to do for him? He played so poorly, and then he came back and played great. So Yeah, I think sometimes you lose that, and if there's a little bit of a vacuum, then it can grow a little bit bigger. And while this team isn't not tragically bad, they're just average. I think that's part of the reason that they've been average.
Yeah, and I think too, like, what are we comparing them to? The greatest season in program history?
Yeah,
like,
out of 120 years or whatever. Yeah.
We're comparing them to the team that just did what nobody else has ever done in the program's entire history. And so if that's suddenly the benchmark, well, we escalated things really quickly to where that's now the standard is 12 wins and Sugar Bowls and Big 12 titles. You know, like, we have to be realistic too.
Yeah, but you know, if you look at the last 10 or 12 years, Craig, is it really the standard has been more close to double-digit wins than it has been the 1-11 and 2-7?
Has it? Over the last few years?
Since 2000, when they broke the
I think
drought
it's been
for bowl games.
pretty much both. 2 wins, 1 win.
You had, I just said that, 2-7, 1-11. We understand both were very unique circumstances. But for the most part, since around 2011, 10-3, win the Big 12 in 13 and 14, had a hell of a run in 15 that was blown up by the Seth Russell injury, 16 blown up by the scandal and coaching change, 6-0 at one point. Yes, 17 and also 20 were disasters, but 12-2 in the year before. Remember, 2019, they're playing for a Big 12 title. I think it's not what it was last year as the standard. I think it's more better than the 7-6, 6-7, or 8-5. I think it's a little bit higher than that.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that that's the expectation, but there's also reality that, you know, there was going to be a drop-off after you win 12 games and you have the best season of all time. Like, yeah, you would like to see them maintain that, and yeah, there's going to be disappointment that they're not going to scrape 10 wins. 10 wins is impossible. They could win out, and they're not winning 10 games. And so, you know, that's a disappointment because you'd love to win them all, obviously, but I don't know. I don't see this team as like a year in and year out. I'm expecting 10 and 11 wins out of them just yet. I think that they have the capabilities of that, but I don't think that that's just like if they don't reach that, then it's a disappointment necessarily. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong in being programmed that way.
Again. Say that last part again.
I just don't think that the standard is 10 wins or it's not the standard being met.
Yeah,
because I think that's kind of what you're saying, and that's where we just.
Well, what was the
when you lose your all-time best NFL draft class after your best all-time season, and you lose that type of leadership in a super senior COVID-laden time period where you have all these veterans, and you lose all of that, like. I think the standard, you have to be mindful of it. Yeah, you might only win 8 games the following year and be accepting that. Now, if they don't even win 8 and they only win 6 games and they fall, 5 times in a row to close out the season, then yeah, that's a massive disappointment. But, I don't think that every year this program is built just yet to where you're like, okay, it's 10 wins or, it's not a very good year for us.
Well, okay, 19, what was their record? 11?
I mean, I understand what it's been. I'm just saying that I don't think right now they're in that spot where they just reload after 12 wins and 10 wins is totally
they're not
realistic.
Alabama.
Yeah,
they're not
that's
Ohio
what I'm saying.
State. No, there's not that. They're not that. They would like that to be eventually the slow progression to that. But no question, 6-4 was not on the docket. But again, I remember when we all had our preseason predictions about what they would do. I will put my hand in the air that I thought Baylor and Oklahoma State would probably play again for the Big 12 title. I believe I had Kansas State 3rd and Oklahoma, then Texas 4 and 5. No one, I didn't. I'll admit it. TCU probably I had 7, 8, or 9. But I do know this is that 6-4 can still end up being pretty nice. You beat TCU, then you go to Austin, throw it on the line, see what happens, possibly win a bowl game. 8-5 this year would be a pretty good number. But 7-6 would not be something, or 6-7 would not be something would leave a very good taste in a lot of people's mouth. We'll even ask Mac Rhodes that. What is the standard? What is the standard? Is it fair to say that it should be, after what you were last year, the best team, as Craig mentioned, ever in Baylor history? And then what's the standard? What is the standard? I got a feeling he might say what he said before about they are here to compete for conference championships and more. But speaking of that, congratulations to Scott Drew for 400 wins, his career 400th win last night.
They were competing for it till last week, and they absolutely no-showed.
Yeah, I know, they did. Also, one other note, that